She was 55 years old, a widow, a philanthropist, a woman so beloved in Phoenix society that people called her the heart of every room she walked into. She spent her evenings organizing charity galas, writing letters to friends, and planning parties for the people she loved. On the last night of her life, March 31st, 1988, Jeanne Tovrea sat at her desk in her beautiful home in one of Phoenix's most exclusive gated communities and finished writing the final invitations for an upcoming party. She sealed the envelopes. She smiled. She went to bed. She never woke up. By 1 in the morning, someone had crept through her kitchen window, walked silently through her darkened home, and fired 5 bullets into her head as she slept. 3 of those shots were fired through a pillow, so no neighbor would hear. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was not a random attack. This was a professional execution. Someone had paid to have Jeanne Tovrea killed, and the question that haunted Phoenix for the next 7 years was simple. Who? What makes this case truly disturbing is not just the crime itself, it's what came after. A calculated murder, a professional hit, and yet the person who allegedly ordered it all lived freely for years, completely untouched by the law. That is what makes this case so hard to let go of. My name is Stephen, and this is the story of Jeanne Tovrea, the $100,000 murder mystery that Arizona has never truly been able to forget. To understand why someone wanted Jeanne Tovrea dead, you first have to understand who she was and how she got here. Jeanne was not born into wealth. She came from humble beginnings in Arkansas, a small-town girl who had worked hard, built herself up step by step, and eventually made her way to Phoenix, Arizona. In Phoenix, she found her footing. She became a successful realtor. She built a reputation as someone honest, warm, and genuinely kind. And then, in 1973, her life changed forever. She married Edward Tovrea Sr. Edward Tovrea was not just a wealthy man. He was a legend in Arizona. His family had built their fortune through the cattle business, one of the most powerful pioneer families in the entire state. Edward had also served in World War II, where he spent nearly 3 years as a prisoner of war. He was respected, he was admired, and now he was in love with Jeanne. Phoenix society welcomed Jeanne with open arms, but Edward's 3 adult children from his previous marriage, Edward Jr., known by the nickname Hap, and his 2 sisters Georgia and Priscilla, were not so welcoming. From the very beginning, they believed Jeanne was a gold digger, a woman who had married their father for his money, a woman who did not belong in their family. For 10 years, that tension simmered beneath the surface. Then, in 1983, Edward Tovrea Sr. died, and his will made everything worse. Edward left behind an estate worth approximately $8 million, and the bulk of it, the mansion, the art collection, the investments, all of it went to Jeanne. Each of his 3 children received only $200,000, paid out in small monthly installments of just $1,500 per month. Hap and his sisters were furious. And I want to be honest about something here. Whatever anyone thought about Jeanne, Edward Tovrea was a grown man, a war hero, a businessman who had built his fortune with his own hands. He had every legal and moral right to leave his estate to whoever he chose, resenting the woman he loved for simply being chosen. That says far more about them than it ever did about her. They had watched their father build a fortune over decades, and in their view, a woman they despised had walked away with almost all of it. But Jeanne moved forward. She threw herself into Phoenix's social world. She chaired charity balls. She organized fundraisers. She donated to causes she believed in. She became in every sense of the word, a true Phoenix socialite. By 1987, she had even found love again. A new boyfriend, a kind man she had known from years earlier. She was happy, she was hopeful, she was making plans for the future. She had no idea that someone was already planning something else entirely. It started with a phone call. Sometime in 1987, nearly a year before her murder, Jeanne began receiving calls from a man who identified himself as Gordon Phillips. He said he was a freelance journalist, working on a story for Time Life publications. He claimed to be researching a piece about prisoners of war from World War II, and specifically about Edward Tovrea Sr.'s time as a POW. It seemed reasonable. Edward had been a prisoner of war. His story was genuinely interesting. People did write about things like this, but something felt wrong to Jeanne. She couldn't explain it exactly. It was just a feeling. The calls were too frequent. The questions were too personal. Gordon Phillips seemed less interested in Edward's POW experience and more interested in Jeanne herself, in her home, her routine, her life. So Jeanne did something smart. She hired a friend, a retired CIA agent, to investigate Gordon Phillips. The retired CIA agent found nothing. No journalist by that name. No article being written. No record of Gordon Phillips existing at all. Jeanne contacted Time Life publications directly. They confirmed they had never heard of anyone named Gordon Phillips. The man was using a fake name. And this is the part that stays with me the most. Jeanne was not naive. She was not careless. She hired a professional investigator. She called the publication directly. She did everything a smart, cautious person could possibly do. And it still wasn't enough. Sometimes, no matter how careful we are, fate has already decided something else. Jeanne's story is a painful reminder of just how fragile life truly is. Jeanne was now frightened, and she had good reason to be. In July 1987, she agreed to meet Phillips in person, in Newport Beach, California. She brought her daughter Deborah with her for safety. They met this man. They spoke with him for 30 to 45 minutes, and both Jeanne and Deborah felt deeply uncomfortable the entire time. There was something about him that felt calculated, cold, wrong. They never met him again. But Phillips kept calling. He left voicemail messages on Jeanne's answering machine. One of those messages said something that would later become extremely significant in this case. He mentioned having a meeting with someone he called Ed Jr. in Los Angeles. Ed Jr., Hap Tovrea, the stepson who hated her. Jeanne was so frightened by this point that in November 1987, just 5 months before her murder, she took out a life insurance policy worth $2.7 million. She named her daughter Deborah as the sole beneficiary. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong, or how soon it would happen. March 31st, 1988. It was a Wednesday evening, an ordinary evening in every way that mattered. Jeanne spent the afternoon visiting friends and running errands. She mailed a few of the party invitations she had been preparing. At 7 in the evening, she called her sister, Sandra. They talked for about half an hour. Jeanne was in good spirits. She had a plane ticket booked for the very next day. She was planning to visit her boyfriend in Las Vegas. She had so much to look forward to. She said goodnight to her sister. She went to bed. Somewhere across Phoenix, that same evening, a man left his house at 9 p.m. He told his wife he would be back later. He drove toward Lincoln Hills Estates, one of Phoenix's most secure, most exclusive gated communities, a place where wealthy residents lived behind walls and security guards and alarm systems specifically because they valued their safety. But there was one weakness in Jeanne Tovrea's security system, One window in the kitchen, a 24-inch panel above the sink, was not connected to the alarm. Whoever came that night knew exactly which window that was. They carefully removed the glass panel, placed it on a chair outside, climbed through the opening, moved silently through the darkened kitchen. They walked straight to the master bedroom. No hesitation, no searching. They knew exactly where they were going. They yanked the phone cord out of the wall so Jeanne could not call for help. They pressed a pillow over her face. And they fired. 5 times. All at point-blank range. 3 shots through the pillow. 2 directly. Jeanne Tovrea never had a chance to fight back. Never had a chance to scream. She died in her sleep, in her own bed, in what should have been the safest place in the world. The killer then moved through the bedroom, opened her jewelry box, emptied her purse, made it look like a robbery, and then, in a detail that investigators found deeply strange, they left through the sliding glass door. Instead of going back out the window, they came in. Opening that sliding door triggered the burglar alarm. Police arrived at 12:55 in the morning, just 10 minutes after the alarm went off. With them was a police dog named Bear. Bear moved through the house without hesitation, straight to the master bedroom door. When officers opened it, Bear jumped onto the bed. They pulled back the sheets, and there was Jeanne. Police immediately knew this was not a normal robbery. Nothing truly valuable had been taken. The real jewelry, worth tens of thousands of dollars, was in another room, untouched. Only costume jewelry had been disturbed. The scene had been staged. A family member of Edward Tovrea Sr., present at the scene that morning, looked at the evidence and said exactly what investigators were already thinking. A burglar does not shoot someone 5 times. Phoenix homicide detectives began their investigation immediately. They interviewed everyone close to Jeanne. They examined her will. They looked at who might benefit from her death. The answers pointed in one direction very quickly. When Jeanne died, the trust fund that Edward Tovrea Sr. had established, the one that had been paying Jeanne income for years, would now transfer to his 3 children. Each of them stood to receive approximately $800,000 upon Jeanne's death. Hap Tovrea, Georgia, Priscilla, the 3 stepchildren who had hated Jeanne from the beginning. Detectives also found Jeanne's answering machine tapes, the ones with Gordon Phillips's voice on them. They listened carefully. One of the messages mentioned Ed Jr., Hap. This was significant, but they couldn't yet prove anything. 4 months after the murder, in August 1988, detectives pulled phone records connected to Hap Tovrea. What they found was interesting. In the 10 days before Jeanne's murder, Hap had called a man named James Harrod 33 times. Detectives brought Harrod in for questioning. He was calm. He said his relationship with Hap was simply business. They had been working on various ventures together. There was no obvious connection between Harrod and the mysterious Gordon Phillips. The detectives made a note of the conversation and moved on. The case hit a wall. Months passed, then a year, then 2 years, then 3. Jeanne Tovrea's murder remained unsolved until television changed everything. In April 1992, 4 years after Jeanne's murder, the popular television show Unsolved Mysteries aired an episode about her case. During the broadcast, they played a portion of the answering machine tape. The voice of Gordon Phillips, the mysterious man who had stalked Jeanne for months before her death, went out to millions of television viewers across America, and someone recognized it. A man named Kurt Costello was watching the show with his family that evening. When he heard Gordon Phillips speak, he stopped. He knew that voice. It sounded exactly like his brother-in-law, James Harrod. Kurt recorded a rerun of the episode and sent copies to his siblings, including his sister Anne, who was married to James Harrod at the time. Anne listened to the tape, and something inside her broke open, because Anne Harrod already knew things her husband had told her, things she had been carrying for 4 years, in silence, trying to pretend they weren't real. In January 1994, an anonymous caller contacted Phoenix police. They identified the voice on the Unsolved Mysteries tape as James Cornell Harrod and provided his address and date of birth. That anonymous caller was later identified as a friend of Anne's, a former FBI agent named Jeff Fulver, who knew what Anne knew and believed it was time for the truth to come out. Detectives pulled Harrod's phone records again, this time much more thoroughly. What they found was staggering. Between July 1987 and April 1988, the months leading up to Jeanne's murder, James Harrod and Hap Tovrea had made over 1,500 phone calls to each other, 1,500 calls, and on the single day before Jeanne was murdered, 52 of those calls took place, 52 calls in one day. Investigators also found that Hap Tovrea's company had sent over $35,000 in payments to James Harrod, both before and after the murder. In November 1994, detectives met with Ann Costello, now separated from Harrod, under a grant of immunity. She would not be prosecuted for anything she revealed, as long as she told the complete truth, and she told them everything. According to Anne, her husband had told her that Hap Tovrea had hired him to arrange Jeanne's murder for $100,000. Harrod had posed as Gordon Phillips, had met Jeanne in Newport Beach specifically to study her, to learn her home's layout, to understand her routines. Anne said that on the night of March 31st, 1988, Harrod had left their home at 9 p.m. He returned at 2 in the morning, and he told her it was done. On September 14th, 1995, 7 years after Jeanne Tovrea was murdered, detectives arrested James Butch Harrod. The evidence against him was substantial. Forensic experts matched 19 fingerprints and palm prints found at the crime scene, on the kitchen window, the kitchen counter, and the outside gate, to James Harrod. The phone records, the cash payments, Anne's testimony, the voice on the answering machine tape, the fingerprints throughout Jeanne's home. Everything pointed at Harrod, but Harrod maintained his innocence throughout. At his trial in 1997, he testified in his own defense. He claimed he never posed as Gordon Phillips, never met Jeanne, never broke into her home. He suggested, without any supporting evidence, that his fingerprints had been planted at the scene using a prosthetic fingerprint glove. The jury did not believe him. James Harrod was convicted of first-degree murder and felony murder. He was sentenced to death. But here is where this case takes a turn that many people find deeply uncomfortable. The man police believed had ordered the murder, the man who allegedly paid $100,000 for Jeanne's death, Hap Tovrea, her own stepson, was never charged with any crime. Not once. Hap appeared in court only a single time during the proceedings. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right, his right to remain silent, and walked away. Even the Maricopa County attorney at the time said publicly, after Harrod's arrest, and I am quoting directly from court documents, "I do not believe this is the whole story." Police raided Hap Tovrea's home in California in 1995. They found nothing that could be used to charge him. Harrod, for his part, never named Hap in any official confession, never gave evidence against him, never tried to save himself by implicating his alleged co-conspirator. Detective Reynolds, the lead investigator, sat across from Harrod during one interrogation and told him directly, Tovrea is laughing at you. He used you. He is living freely while you are sitting here." Harrod's response was calm. He said he had nothing to say about Tovrea. He carried whatever he knew to his grave. James Butch Harrod died in prison on January 28, 2019. He was 65 years old. He had spent over 2 decades on Arizona's death row, still insisting he was an innocent man. Tovrea also passed away, having never faced a single charge in connection with his stepmother's death. This case, even today, leaves serious questions unanswered. If Harrod was the man who broke into Jeanne's home and fired those 5 shots, how did a 250-pound man with a lifelong leg disability climb down a steep, rugged mountainside in the dark without being seen? If his fingerprints were everywhere at the point of entry, why were they found nowhere on the items that had been staged to look like a robbery? Most criminals who wear gloves inside a home remove them at the point of entry, not put them on. There was also a separate claim, never admitted in court, that another man, a California death row inmate named James Majors, had confessed to a fellow prisoner that he was the actual trigger man in Jeanne's murder. Majors denied it. The accounts didn't fully match the physical evidence. The court excluded it. And then there is this final detail. When Jeanne Tovrea died, the money that was expected to go to Hap and his sisters did not actually go to them. It went to Jeanne's own daughter, Deborah. Because of how the trust was structured, Hap and his siblings each received $800,000. But the bulk of Jeanne's estate, including her $2.7 million life insurance policy, went to Deborah Nolan Luster. Deborah was briefly considered a suspect in the early investigation. She showed some deception during a polygraph examination, but investigators ultimately concluded her emotional state at the time explained the results, and she was never charged. The full truth of what happened on the night of April 1st, 1988, may never be completely known. A man died in prison maintaining his innocence. The alleged mastermind died free, and the woman at the center of all of it, Jeanne Tovrea, never got the full justice her story deserved. Jeanne Tovrea was 55 years old when someone decided her life was worth $100,000. She was a woman who had worked hard for everything she had, who had loved deeply and been loved in return, who had spent her years giving back to her community, supporting charities, and filling rooms with warmth and laughter. On the last evening of her life, she was sealing envelopes, excited about a party she was planning for the people she cared about. Some of those people received those invitations after she was already gone. They opened the envelope, they read her handwriting, and then they remembered that she was no longer here to host the party she had planned so carefully. Jeanne deserved better than what happened to her. She deserved better than a murder that was never fully solved, better than a justice system that convicted one man while another walked free. But she also deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a woman who lived fully, who loved generously, and who left a mark on everyone she ever knew. If this story moved you, if you believe that names like Jeanne's deserve to be remembered, please subscribe to this channel. Every week, we bring you real stories of real people whose lives mattered, whose names deserve to be known, because every person in every case we cover was someone's whole world. Thank you for watching.